Hello. It's so great to see you, Barbara.
Yeah, it's so good to see you too, Ellen. I always look forward to my conversations with you.
Thank you so much. Welcome to the first inaugural Define Yourself show. And the goal of the show is to have a conversation with captivating, empathetic, and motivated individuals such as Barbara, our first guest here. It's very exciting. And these individuals will possess the unique ability to tap into and uncover their extraordinary human potential. And we aim to explore human potential at work and beyond from the perspective that prioritizes each of us as whole humans before our roles as employees, business owners, fill in the blank. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Barbara to the audience. Barbara Gustavson is a mental and brain health advocate and leadership facilitator who trains various community members, helping on dealing with stress and burnout and becoming more resilient. Her holistic and strengths-based approach in professional development are rooted in science and brain health. She is the author of Permission to be Bold and co-author of Breaking Average. And welcome again.
I am so honored that I'm your first guest. Every time I talk to you, I just feel like you and we look at things differently. I love to see how you look at things, and we just have these amazing conversations.
Absolutely. So let's dive in.
Yes.
So tell me a little bit about the backstory that led you to work in the area of brain health.
Yeah, so it's one that I never planned. I used to be a government contractor, working near Washington, D.C., as a financial analyst, which is another fun story. But through just the journey of my mother having a stroke and me being her caregiver, it was probably the first time I suffered my first bout with burnout. I was working full time, volunteering, raising two young boys, and it really hit me hard. And probably the first time I started asking questions. Why is this so hard? I definitely expected myself to be doing everything, but I never connected that my brain was exhausted. I had some underlying things going on. But also in the process, I decided not to go back to my work near Washington, D.C., and decided to go through coaching and leadership. And I ended up loving it. But what I found was I had a hard time with my memory, presenting, panic attacks, and it was frustrating just because I really wanted to move forward. And so about 5 years into that, I came across this book called Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. It totally changed my thinking about not just my life, but running my business and how the brain is involved in everything we do. It was just one of those aha moments. And I love the quote by Oliver Wendell Holmes: "A mind that is stretched by new experience can never go back to its old dimensions." And that was kind of my call it come to Jesus moment too, because I had a lot going on up here.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. That's amazing. And well, you and I've had a little bit of a chance to share some of our background. The audience doesn't know my background, so we'll pepper that in through this in some future interviews. But going through the School of Hard Knocks, man, whew, do we learn a lot.
Truth.
Exactly. So let's dive into the next question. Why is this important to you personally?
Yeah, so I mentioned I had a lot going on in my own brain, and what ended up happening was the author of that book that I read, I ended up getting a chance to meet him. I ended up getting my brain scan, mainly because we have something called Huntington's disease in my family. It's a brain disorder. I've had a number of relatives with it. My sister had it. My dad's in later stages, and I wanted to be proactive with my own brain health. Another reason was, and I journaled what I did, Ellen. One day I sat down and I journaled, why is this so important to me? Because it was one of those things, that's all I thought about was brain. And it was kind of annoying. It's like, why am I always thinking about brain health? And I wrote down 17 reasons why. Each one was a name. And they were people in my life that I've known, relatives, friends that have had brain health issues that have impacted their whole life. And I was like, wow, it's been around me my whole life and I never saw it up until now. So that became my motivation to be proactive with my brain, but also change my legacy just because there was a lot of fun stuff that ran in my family that I wanted to avoid, but also I wanted to have a great future with my future grandkids one day.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, did was there any like precipitous moment that kind of happened that preceded your realizations that you'd like to share, or was it more of just a gradual awareness?
I think probably when I saw the images of my own scan,
Mm.
it just shifted because it's interesting because psychiatrists are really virtually the only profession that rarely looks at the organ that they treat. Like a cardiologist will look at the heart if there's heart issues. If you break a bone, you'll get an X-ray, but unless there's a really known head injury, they rarely look. And for me to see, wow, I had 3 mild injuries. One of them pointed to a horseback riding accident that I had when I was 19. I had broken my back, hit my head, but because I was never knocked unconscious, they never scanned me. And so when I went back to school that fall, I had ringing in my ears. I couldn't concentrate. Even when I looked at my textbook, it was like ants scattering on the page. But no one ever thought, even myself, that it could have been from that injury. And so when I saw it, and I saw that I had some troubled areas in my brain. It was at first hard to take, but then when I looked at the treatment plan, I was like, you know what? I can be proactive. So they gave me a plan, including neurofeedback training, some supplementation that could boost activity and blood flow in my brain. And over time, I really started to notice improvement, not just in my brain, but in my presentations. My panic attacks were virtually gone, and there was a several year period that I had none. And now if they do come up, because I noticed they started going up just a little bit during the pandemic, which a lot of people struggled with, I have coping skills. I know exactly what to do. And what I realize now is I've been able to build resilience in my brain, which helps my overall resilience too.
Wow, that's just fascinating. I'm so sorry to hear about your
Yeah.
accident, but it sure did lead you on a journey, right, of discovery?
It did, and what I find was interesting, you know how life takes you through situations, and then sometimes you don't understand why, but later on you're like, "Oh, I get it now." I had the opportunity, years later, in fact, it was a couple years ago, to coach a last year nursing student at the same school I went with who also had a horseback injury. And it was a little bit different place, but when she came to me, and she had been in ICU for 2 weeks, and I have permission to share her story. She had no memory of what happened. She only heard from other people. Um, but after a few weeks, the doctor sent her back to school, and just like me, she had ringing in her ears, just like
Ooh,
me, she couldn't focus, just like me. Um, she was depressed and scared, um, but unlike me, she stuck with school. I had dropped out of school when that happened to me, but she stuck with it, and she was determined to finish off her school. So we worked together, and I taught her easy basics, and the great thing was her doctor was on board to really look and take a, brain-based approach to some of these areas struggled, and I'm so excited. She ended up graduating on time, did really well, and now she's a critical care nurse, but it gave her hope, just because she thought her career, wasn't gonna happen, but just by changing the way she looked at herself and getting to the root cause of some of these issues, she was able to try specific strategies that work for her brain type.
wow, what are the odds? Like, that's just so wonderful that you guys came across each other.
I know.
Wow, and really helped her. That's just amazing. So, what are some of the risk factors that could potentially harm your brain, and what's some steps that you could take to improve it for just the general audience? They don't know
Yes.
as much as you do, and I'm learning and I'm a sponge.
Well, no, I will tell you, Ellen, it's interesting because some people, when they hear the word brain, they're like, "Ooh, that's too hard, that's too complicated." I feel like I'm living proof that anyone can learn easy strategies. And the thing is, the brain is complex. It is, but it loves easy. It loves easy pathways, and it works really well when we give it a clear target. So what I learned was there's a number of risk factors that can lead. They're the top risk factors that can lead to Alzheimer's. And Amen Clinics has developed a really easy mnemonic to remember. It's called Bright Minds. And so there are 11 risk factors that could potentially harm your brain. And just really, I'll go through it super quickly if you would like to. I won't go to it. That's like a whole nother topic. But
Yeah,
the
no.
B is for blood flow. That's like really important that we have adequate blood flow so we can think clearly. The R is for retirement and aging. So it's really important to keep your learning up. And I know you and I are both learners, so we've got that down. Inflammation, that's the first I. That is a huge trigger for a lot of brain health issues. So if you think of any inflammation in your body, it's also happening up here. And if you think of just even viruses, even from COVID, that's something that happened to many people now that they're seeing scans over time, especially long COVID. Inflammation can trigger mental health issues at times. Genetics is a huge one. That is probably my biggest one, just because if you have genetic factors, you are more at risk for certain things. I also learned this really gave me hope. You know, it's not a death sentence. Your genes are not a death sentence. Because I was really worried about Huntington's, and I'm thinking, what's the point? What if I end up like certain relatives? But it's not a death sentence. And the studying that they've done in something called epigenetics, there's certain things that we can do that often keep certain genes from being turned on. But it does require being proactive. The H is for head trauma. That's something that I'm at risk to just because I've had a couple of head traumas. So that can put you more at risk. And what they found is even past concussions, even if you did well over time, you could start showing symptoms. And they've have found that in a lot of NFL studies. T is for toxins. That's a big one. Mental health. So we're in the mind. So mental health is a big one. Infections, brain infections are definitely a risk factor. The N is for neurohormones, which I found fascinating just learning about. And so thinking about dopamine, serotonin, that's a couple of them. It's really important that those are balanced. And that our brain isn't flooded by dopamine. It can be think of it as your motivator in your brain. But when you flood it, that's when we can become more impulsive or even addicted. So the idea is to give it good, healthy drips. The D is for diabetes, and this is where you combine obesity with diabetes, just because that is really blowing up. And in fact, I can't remember the exact study, but CDC was saying type 3 diabetes is going to be like the new Alzheimer's, just because it is really exploding. And then the last one, sleep. I feel like that last one, if people can get that down, some of the other things will take care of itself, because sleep is, and the right quality sleep, it's when our brain flushes out the toxins. Because a lot of it, if we don't get right sleep, the toxins keep building, and over time, that's a major risk factor.
Wow. So I can't remember which letter it was, but I was laughing to myself because a few years ago I did 23andMe and found out I had I'm one of the few people that likes cilantro. It's based on my genes. There's actually a gene for tasting cilantro in a good way as opposed to dirty dishwater. I don't know
Are
if you
you
knew that.
serious? I knew I always liked it because I absolutely love cilantro.
So it's like we could learn a lot from our genes and which restaurant to go to. But
That is fabulous. I took that same one. It was just really revealing of the different things I've never
yeah,
thought about
yeah.
before.
But on a serious note, I'm so appreciative of you giving us, some guidance about that on those risk factors. So let's move to our second question, a little bit related. If there were only one or two things a person can do right now to improve and support their brain health, what would that be? Love to hear your thoughts.
Yes. So, if you think I know you and I are assessment junkies. We love learning about our leadership style, our communication style. All those little tests are a lot of fun. And Socrates said it best, know thyself. I really when I started getting into this, I realized I didn't know anything about my brain. That's myself. If I don't know what controls myself,
Mm-mm.
then I could keep, I'm still headed for more trouble. So I feel like the very first thing we need to do is know the current functioning of our brain. Just like if we're taking a trip, you need to know where you are to get to where you're going. If we
Mhm.
don't know the function of our brain, we could get going, but a lot of things could go awry. We might not know why that is. Not everyone is able to get a brain scan like me, but there's a free, kind of fun online assessment, which I know we'll share the link that someone can take to learn their brain type, so they can know the risk factors, so they can start addressing them as soon as possible. So I would say that is the very first place to start. There's a lot of other things I could recommend. I will share one more, and we hear it a lot, so I'm gonna sound like a naggy mother. Drink your water. And here's why. Your brain is 80% water, 20% fat.
Mm.
So when we're not drinking enough water, our brain's dehydrated. And it's not just the amount of water, it's the quality of water too. That is very important just because it will reach you wanna make sure it's reaching the cells. It's not just being flushed out. You wanna make sure that your body is also healthy, that it's absorbing the water that you're getting in. So water
Mhm.
is a huge thing that I think people tend to forget or overlook.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, I went to a nutritionist and she was like telling me how many ounces per day I'm gonna float away.
It's
I
a
think it was
lot.
like 90 ounces or something. Anyway, I don't know. I'm just telling you what my conversation,
Yeah, a
not
lot of
any advice to the audience, but yes,
a lot of them say it's half your body weight. Some adjust that a little bit. That's typically what I tend to do,
or
and
in
so
ounces. Yeah.
yeah, and I'm a pretty tall person, so it's a lot of water, but I just try to really spread out, and I the biggest thing is, it's easy to forget, especially when you're back to back on meetings, and I anchor it, to a habit I have, and that's meetings. And so at the end of every meeting, I'll grab a glass of water, have it, and drink it during the next meeting.
Well, I just have to say the tiny habit certification that I went through is so
That's
happy and proud of you, Barbara.
yes.
So for the audience, if you guys don't know, the way to do tiny habits is there's a prompt, which you just said is a meeting, and then you have a tiny behavior that normally is less than a minute, and then you celebrate. So I don't know what your celebration is, but mine would be like, yes, I drank my water.
Absolutely, and the thing is, the brain loves tiny habits. Like our mind, we won't wanna make big leaps and bounds and get to that goal, and our brain will start to do it, and it's like, "Whoa." The brain and here's why, the brain loves familiarity. It loves routine because it sees it as safe and predictable, and anytime you step out of your comfort zone, at first, you're all excited, but then a brain's like, "No way, that's unsafe, that's unpredictable," so it's gonna fight back. That's when we get discouraged and realize, "This is too hard," but tiny, easy, repeated steps, the brain absolutely loves, and that sets up a great foundation for a new habit.
Absolutely. And I believe Dr. Amon's group is using Dr. Fogg's approach to tiny habits. If I'm
Absolutely. We have, just because we have about over 8,000 students, and some of them are BJ Fogg's certified trainers too. So it's so lovely just to see them part of our group.
That's amazing, yeah, and so I'll just talk about the brain only for a minute because this is how much I know, other than the fact
You
that
know a lot.
I used mine for 63 years, so maybe that counts, but
Absolutely.
and that is that, the celebration, Dr. Fogg talks about that, BJ Fogg, who wrote the book Tiny Habits, by the way, and it was his research that underlied, James Clear's book. So I know that that book, got to be a really big selling book. But
Absolutely.
he was using BJ Fogg's, all his research and stuff. And it's about how when you celebrate with that emotion, you're infusing the emotion, you're encoding the habit. And it's just a beautiful thing. And so this idea of, dispel the myth that it takes 3 weeks to build a habit. So
Yeah. It is amazing what the brain can do, and oh my goodness, Ellen, you and I can have some really conversations on how when your brain is wired with a certain belief, how it really does work with you to achieve that belief. We
Mhm.
just need to make sure that we're locked on the beliefs that we wanna have.
Exactly.
Otherwise, yeah,
That's
yeah.
amazing. So I'm going to turn the page here real quick. So, how would you say that the brain health ties into other aspects of life? That's a kind of a broad question, but
It is. See, my brain goes to a story, when I was a student of Dr. Amen, I was going through his brain health, more clinical certification course. I'll never forget the story that he told of Phineas Gage, and it's a research article that anyone can look up, and probably one of the first articles studied that showed that there was a brain and behavior connection. But the story goes, it's a true one. It's about a guy named Phineas Gage. He was a railroad worker in Vermont in around the 1840s. He was a leader. He was dependable, had great character. People looked up to him. And one day he was tamping down an iron rod on some gunpowder powder and exploded, and the spear, the top of it went through his prefrontal cortex, like the top of his head, but amazingly, he survived.
wow.
And with some help, they walked him to the town doctor, they pulled it out, and 3 months later, he returned to work, but he was no longer Phineas Gage. He
Mm,
swore, he caused fights, he had very little character, and he ended up getting fired, and he went from job to job to job, and he got, hired at Barnum Circus, where he worked there 10 years. He passed away after 10 years, but it really does show you how the brain is involved in everything we do. And that changed my thinking. At first, it was challenging because especially when you come to moral judgment, you know, but I never thought that it was a function of the brain. So it really just changed my thinking around that.
wow, that's amazing. So tell me, I've got to maybe go to a little bit of an open discussion here. I do have a couple more questions, and we're doing great on time, and you just got all this great wisdom to share. Tell me more about how, kind of what your role is with the Dr. Amen clinics and kind of the mission, because I think that would be really wonderful for the, your personal mission and that of the, because I know that that's one part of your business. You have a much broader business. So maybe elaborate on that. I think that'd be very helpful for the audience.
Thank you. Yeah, I just been so grateful to be able to partner with Dr. Amen and work as part of our team. We have, I mentioned a number of students that are teaching his courses in, I would say, over 35 different countries now. And they're teaching school courses, organizations with veterans, first responders, anywhere that people gather, and they're taught as brain health programs, but they tie back to resilience. They support mental health for employees, and it's just been a joy to see how these trainers are taking it and just getting really creative and tying it to their business. I talked with one of our students the other day who was a private detective, and she's teaching
Wow.
this brain health to people that she's meeting, even in the courts, and it's just really phenomenal. And what I love about this, because so many people are needing support for mental health, this gives them something in the meantime that they can do. Many people aren't open to counseling or even know that they need help. But if we give them basics on how to take care of their brain and make it healthier, it might help some of these symptoms that they might be having, such as anxiety, PTSD. It's just a way to get them new resources that they don't know about otherwise.
That just hits home so much for me, so thank you for that. Because one
Yeah.
of the things that I really wanna weave into this program, and the work that I'll be doing in my own business is this idea that, we get to explore our human potential, and that we have a locus of control, which is a fancy way of saying we can be in control of some things, not everything, but
Mhm.
why not focus on the things we can control? And with these new
Absolutely.
resources, these are ways that people can do that, right? And that just is so wonderful.
Absolutely. One of the things in my own local community last year, I helped co launch a horse resilience program for first responders and healthcare workers impacted by PTSD. It's not a therapy group, but what it does is it teaches them about their nervous system through horses. Horses are wonderful mirrors to teach us what's going on inside. But what happens a lot with PTSD, like our nervous system is supposed to have a healthy ebb and flow. With a lot of people, their nervous system either gets stuck on high, a state of hyperarousal, or low, they disconnect, a hypoarousal. And so, to get that healthy ebb and flow, we can retrain our nervous system, which the brain is a part of. And so, we give them easy tools, easy ways, but it's really starting with self awareness of what's involved and what's happening, when they're triggered on the job. Um, they don't talk about their trauma in this group, which is beautiful because they really learned through the horses and some of the teaching, and they find what works for them over a short period of time. We have a 6-week program. So it just shows, like what you said, we have more control than we think we do. And in
Mhm.
cases where we need to point them to more resources, we give them those resources that are available.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a bit of what I think is this funny self-deprecating scenario. So I
Uh,
don't want to take anything away from people with PTSD, but I think you know that I just moved from Washington State to Florida, and I tell everybody that I realized during this time that it took 9 months to conceive and birth a baby, and it took 10 to move from Washington State to Florida, but I didn't get the epidural.
wow.
So I really, my nervous system needed some adjusting, because it's just constant like packing, figuring out, all that. So knowing that these resources available is just fantastic.
Yes, and what I've also found is, a lot of industries have employees that have experienced trauma over the last few years and don't even know it, and it's showing up in different ways, turnover rate, just detachment, or just not being involved, or they're losing their passion. A lot of people are getting burnout, and one of the symptoms is becoming cynical. So we're seeing a high level of that. And so resilience has been something that I'm wanting to really tie into a language. I want to take a strength-based approach. Like, we do need to recognize there's trauma, but let's talk about the opportunities of growth. And there's something called post-traumatic growth that's talked a lot about in the psychology world. And that's the ability to come out stronger because of the trauma, not in spite of it, but because of the trauma. But it's being intentional to look at what those opportunities of growth are. So I've decided to become trauma informed, um, tie into trauma training, just because I think as a coach, for some people, I need to screen them. They might be at risk for other things and mental health issues. So it's just become part of what I love to do. I never, again, at the beginning, I never imagined it going in this direction, but I'm so grateful to have met people along my journey to help me. And now I'm able to hopefully pay it forward to others.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you and I've had many conversations about resilience because that's
Yes.
another area near and dear to my heart. 3-time cancer survivor here, or thriver. And yeah, and so what happens is, I don't know if this is what your course teaches, but just a little Ellen wisdom anyway through my life was that even when really bad things happen, I could still learn. And so you just have this growth mindset, and you're like, okay, I have cancer. Like, what does that mean? What am I going to learn? And cancer, actually, I have a huge gratitude for it because it taught me a lot of
Wow.
things. And so, kind of what you're doing, going down the resilience, and you're right about the whole how it's impacted so much in corporate America. And I know that I told you a little bit about the mentorship program that I created, the Leverage Mentorship Program, and just there's so many different opportunities, including brain health, that would be so helpful to get the engagement of employees right back to where it was pre-COVID. Kind of by listening to the employees, having the employees feel that they have the locus of control to, seek whatever, options might be out there, including brain health and others, and really just pouring in their goals. And that's kind of what part of what I want to explore in this whole program with the potential, human potential. And when I hear what you guys are doing, it's just so inspiring. And that's what I'm hoping will be inspiring to others as well.
Well, Ellen, I love how you've been able to turn, take something painful and turn it to gratitude. And I've heard this phrase, if we can turn our pain into purpose, it really it can lead us to our calling and lead us ultimately to the impact that we're meant, I believe, to make around us. And for me, one of the things that I just recalled is I've gone through some recent research. A lot of the research, I'm in a psychology grad program, and I love research. A lot of it is based on older research, but newer research is saying that we can actually leverage stress. There's an upside to stress. Not all stress is bad, um, but our belief about stress is very important on how we handle it. It starts with a belief. So one of the things that it's challenged me is, what do I believe about stress? Do I believe it's wrong? Do I believe there's an opportunity in it? So it's really caused me to rethink stress. Even coming up on the holidays, that's a stressful time for my family. And I'm like, I need to rethink that for myself. Because when I think that, it means I have a belief that stress is wrong, and that impacts even my energy. It impacts my energy. Um,
Exactly.
so we're gonna have more to talk about, I have a
I
feeling.
know. I love that. Well, and having, before I left my corporate career after 35 years, and like 2 jobs ago, when I was at Microsoft, I actually owned and did hypnosis. And
Yeah.
there's a really great technique called reframing. Sounds a little bit like that. It might be somewhat different, but that's kind of what resonated for me is like, take something that happened and then we build a story around it that may be actually causing us more pain that if we just adopted a different story, about the event that happened, so the event itself doesn't change. What changes our belief, the story we're telling ourselves about that. And then, we kind of become stronger because of changing that story. So I don't know if this is a little bit
It
abstract.
absolutely makes sense, and what you're essentially doing, you're changing the pattern of your brain. It really is a thing, so reframing is powerful, and, one of an easy exercise, and I love to talk, it's something called the ANTS, automatic negative thoughts, and if you're familiar with cognitive distortions, and it's like the labeling, the generalization, there's all these things that we sometimes build in our mind. We overthink, we overgeneralize, but there's the labeling ant, the blaming ant, the mind reading ant, the fortune telling ant. So there's automatic thoughts that we think that fit into these categories, and we can question them, we can reframe them. And when we do, we can replace it with a new thought and change the pattern from where we were thinking. So I
Yeah.
love the free framing. It's such a powerful tool.
I love how we come at it kind of from different modalities, but
I
it's the
know.
same basic,
It really is.
way of, changing and getting outcomes that are super positive. So that's awesome.
Absolutely.
So I know we kind of took a little bit of sideways. Let's see where we are on my questions. So let's talk a little bit about this one. We often hear a message in our society: stay happy and be positive and don't think this is perfect because of the negative thoughts. What do you have any anything to share on that? Can you maybe elaborate?
Yeah, I like this question. It's interesting. We have a culture that we drive the message, always think positive. And I am all for the mental health and wellness, don't get me wrong. But sometimes we don't give ourselves permission to feel the emotion or even acknowledge it. That can do more harm and good. It might feel good at the moment, tuck it away, let's switch to positive thought. But what the brain and body does is, if we don't respond or acknowledge or even process an emotion, it stores it in our brain, and eventually it'll come back up again, and most often stronger and worse. So I was having a conversation the other day with someone who was struggling with grief, and they kept saying, I just try to get myself busy, distract myself, do what makes me feel good. And while I understand that when you've lost someone, you want the appropriate emotion is sadness or grief. And we need it it's like emotion is data for what's happening.
Mm.
And something that's helped me is taking the emotion I'm feeling and the what's happened and do they match? Is it appropriate? So if I'm angry, but the situation isn't appropriate, then that's when I can really look at what's going on inside me. But if someone has overstepped a boundary that I have set, or has done harm to someone I love, anger is appropriate. How I
Oh,
show that anger, but the thing is, it's data. It's really an opportunity. So I really look at all emotions as healthy because we're human.
it reminds me of Dr. Maxwell talking about, I'm not going to get this right, so you're going to correct me if I have it wrong, but it's not only experience that counts, it's evaluated experience.
Ooh, yes.
Right.
Bingo. Yes,
And so here's a
absolutely.
little bit of a story from my perspective, because that brings up a lot. So I lost my first husband to pancreatic cancer in his mid 40s, and so I was a widow with 2 kids, 12
Wow.
and 8, and I had never lost anyone that close to me. And so grief is a journey. Each person's journey is completely different. And during all that, while working still, at a high powered company like Microsoft, speaking of pressure, some of which was outside of me and some of which was my own, need to excel. I realized that I still needed to process even more emotions than I was allowing myself to.
Mm.
And so I went and I had an EMDR session, which is eye
Ooh.
magnetization desensitive
Mhm.
reprocessing, which they do for a lot of like PTSD and stuff. And the way I describe it, this is just Ellen the patient, not clinical, was that the emotions were stuck in my body. So maybe not just in my mind, but like literally somewhere. And so it was just,
Absolutely.
how do I allow the grief to happen? Because to me, what I learned was that the emotions flow and I go through the experience. That there's like no ability to avoid it. I might as well go through it, as, the organic things were happening. Because, grief, there's no like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 road. I'd be fine for 6 months and then I would have a bad week and who knows what would come up and I would get reminded of missing my husband. So it was quite the roller coaster. So I'm really resonating with what you're saying from the point of view of having successfully gone through the EMDR.
Yes, and I went through that too, and it really helped me realize how, things stay in our body. And I also found out through a chiropractor that trauma can often be stored in the spine,
Mm.
even like up and down. So think of it as a circuit breaker. It's also the messengers to the rest of the body. And I don't know if you read the book, The Body Keeps the Score.
Mm.
Oh, it's fascinating. But your body remembers, it stores those emotions in your cells as memories. And if left unchecked, it could, many people later on experience physical symptoms from the trauma. So it
Mm.
just shows that there's so much that we don't know that can be explored. But we have tools to look for ways, that serve us. And so we can process and so we can function better.
That's amazing. So let's go through to maybe our second to final question. What is your personal vision as you continue to work in your mental health and brain health as an advocate? And I also forgot to get back to you on your business. You can, maybe that'll be my second question.
Or we can combine it however you want. So I really have a heart for community supporters. So if you think about those boots on the ground, it could be healthcare workers, first responders, um, educators, those who are really in the trenches serving different populations. There's a high level of burnout right now happening among them. And I'm concerned, if they're getting burnout, what's going to happen to the people that they're serving? So I'm on a mission to really help give them a boost and help them become more resilient. This past year, I created one of the first ever, I call it Elevate Your Community event. We did it in Fredericksburg, and I created a half day experience for these helpers just to help them take a pause. Just because I remember at the pandemic, I just saw report after report of frontline workers doing all the work, working, it seemed like 24/7, but really taking a hard hit and feeling helpless. It's like, what can I do? I'm not a medical doctor. What can I do? And the more I talk to my friends who are in that category, a lot of them were saying, I just need to take a breath. I just need to breathe and figure out. I just need to take some time to get my head right. So I'm thinking, well, I can give them that space. So we did that half day. We had about 70 for our first event. And the feedback was, I need this again. And I want to connect with more people, because what they found was when they were able to connect with other supporters in the community, even in different industries, they felt more support. They felt understood, and that they weren't alone, and that there were things, little things like tiny habits that they can do even in their crazy day, just to help their brain feel better and feel more clear-headed. And self-care was a big topic. That was definitely one, and that's something that I come a brain-based approach to. And just really quick, if we have time, because this helped me, I'm not immune to this. I have to really safeguard my own brain health and health too. But self-care, for some reason, my brain doesn't take that seriously. Just the word self-care. It just
Mhm.
feels like, when I get more time, that sort of thing. I had to trick my brain almost into, and this is where my brain goes, I had to almost think of the worst that could happen. So there's this fork in a road exercise that I do, and it's just imagine, if I take this path, if I don't take care of myself, what are things going to be like in 1 year, 5 years, 10 years? Not very good. But if I take this path and just start making tiny, regular steps, what could things look like in 5 years, 10 years? So I have to really think about it. And one of the things that helped me is I call it my self-care hygiene, because physical hygiene is like a essential. People got to take showers, brush your teeth,
Right.
Um, but I heard at the very early pandemic, a doctor saying mental hygiene is just as important as washing your hands. And so I'm realizing my self-care hygiene, my spiritual hygiene, my emotional hygiene is just as important. So that's how I really want these community helpers to realize, if they don't safeguard their health, they're at a detriment. They might be putting their clients or their people they're helping at risk because they're not taking care of themselves. So that's how seriously I feel like we need to start taking care of our community helpers.
Yeah, well, gosh. Speaking of the choir on this one, I mean, I talk about, I was the A-type personality in A-type company and got cancer 3 times. So in my view, I was like, God kept giving me the wake-up call. I don't know if you remember that old um, TV show with the red phone ringing.
Oh.
It's like the red phone's ringing, and I'm like, okay, get back to you, God. Anyway, 3rd time I finally listened, and I had to like make a change. I off ramped from being in management to, and then figured out how to build a career in IT, which was a big segue. I'll probably get that into that in a future episode with other people, but suffice it to say that I know what you mean about the burnout. Kind of been there, done that, and in fact, I'm excited that probably come towards the beginning of the year, I'll be an active Thrive Global coach working for Ariana Huffington's company,
Wow,
which
that's
is
very exciting.
it's all about mental health, and or sorry, burnout, and avoiding that, and being, I don't know what your recipe might be for mental health hygiene, and I'm sure that's different for every single person, but just to even to just sit in a group of 70 people and say, I'm not the only one.
It is huge. It really, yes, it's significant. And I think a lot of people are suffering in silence.
Mhm.
They don't know what to say. They don't know how to ask for help. And just to know someone else is going through that and to not feel alone, it just like, phew, I'm so relieved.
Yeah, and I put a post out on LinkedIn. I wish I could remember what I said exactly, but there was some TED Talk about this lady who talks about how important vacations or downtime is to productivity. And I'm gonna put that in the kind of the category of also mental health, because I don't know if we're in a space that if our mental health isn't where it needs to be, we can't be as creative as we're made to be. Right? So I kind of equate the creativity as a little barometer. And it was like, yeah, I mean, think about like when we get our best ideas, my husband's out, fishing or something. And it's like, wow, I never would have thought about that if I was like at my desk, you know, always on, you have to give yourself, the physical downtime and the mental downtime and all of that to be, to help tap into that potential that we all have.
Absolutely. So really cool fact that I think you'll like is like we have the brain waves, the different brain waves.
Yeah.
When we're in a creative state or working, we're in a beta state. And that's really good. But what happens is when we get anxiety, we start overthinking, it gets too high. The beta is too high. And that's where we get all that scrambling and stuff. And so there's easy things that we can do to calm it down, just to bring it down enough to get that creativity. And sometimes it's as simple as when we're stuck on a thought, just taking a 5-minute walk and going out and looking at the blue sky. There
Mhm.
is literally something that does to calm the brain, to bring that back down. And that's often when I can unlock a problem. It's like I'm stuck, but then I unlock it, but it's getting out of your environment.
Yeah, and I've been experimenting with different breathing techniques,
Oh, yes.
because I think, I recently took up voice lessons again and getting my diaphragm moving,
Oh,
and
fun.
it's just I'm so clear after 45 minutes of singing, because I've been moving a lot of air, and it's like, wow, like isn't that interesting? It was kind of a surprise to me.
So you might be interested because that's tied to the nervous system. There's something called the vagus nerve, which I
Yeah.
love the name, Vegas. But that even just humming activates the vagus nerve, which is tied to the nervous system, and you can calm it down. And you can, once you bring that online again, it's like you're calming your body down too.
Hmm. Well, my goodness, we've gone through so many different topics here.
See there, I knew this would be fun.
I would hate to get ourselves to the end here, but I'm afraid I probably have to
Aw.
let you go.
Well, this has been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So I'm gonna switch to the slide so people can see how to take that brain. Is it assessment or
Yes, it's brain health assessment. It takes probably 5 minutes or less to pull up, and it's something it's kind of the way they answer it's kind of it looks at a 360 approach on your health, but it's an easy report to understand, but it'll recommend, based on how you answer, it might recommend a supplement to target a specific area of your brain because that can get confusing because there's so many supplements out there,
right?
um, but one person may need brain calming, another person may need more brain boosting. And some people need both, like me. Like I'm a combination brain type. So there's 5 main types, 16 combinations that are from the 5 main types. So I'm a combination. So I need several different things.
Wow. So here's the screen for everybody to take a look at it. So it's the brainhealthassessment.com. And if you have any thoughts or questions or want to reach out to Barbara, because she's just been a dynamite first interview for our show here, and someone who I care about deeply, you can reach her at discovernextstep.com. So thank you so much. It's just been amazing. I so appreciate you and what you can share with everybody. And I do think this really does. For me, this inspires me. I don't know if I ever told you the story about my cousin, but she had major brain challenges because when she was about 16, she got onto a motorcycle with her friend without a helmet, and a semi did
Wow.
not see them and ran over them and dragged them over
Mm,
like 2 blocks. The only thing that saved her life, because her friend didn't make it, was that she went into like the fetal position. She was in a coma for a week. And she came out of it, and she went on to get her master's.
wow.
And
That's incredible.
she learned a lot about her own brain, her own, and she's helping with special ed, kids for special ed. And I mean, it's just when you hear like what we can do, there are things we can do, and
Absolutely.
yet we're still learning. So that makes it even more exciting.
Well, I love to hear those success stories.
And thank you so much for coming and attending. And I'm sure maybe have you come back because there were so many things we could have talked about.
Oh, count me in, Ellen, and I appreciate you. Thanks for all that you're doing.
Yeah, you take care.
Thanks.